Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you back to the 14th and final round of the FIDE Candidates 2022. We do know one result. That result is that Jan Nepomniachtchi has convincingly won this tournament with so far 9 points out of 13, and today he has the potential to make it 9.5 or 10 points if he defeats Jan Krzysztof Duda, either one of which would be a record since this format was introduced in 2013, an absolutely dominant display. None of the games were drawn early, which means that this round was super exciting, and we get to see how everybody finished, including that second place matchup between Hikaru Nakamura and Ding Liren. Obviously, that matters because Magnus Carlsen has not yet committed to whether or not he will defend the World Championship against Jan Nepomniachtchi. Whoever finishes second would then play against Jan to determine who would be the champion of the world in classical chess. At the end of this recap, I will share my heartfelt thoughts with all of you now that the tournament is over and what to expect in the future in terms of my content. But before that, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, Fabulous. Fabulous is the #1 self-care app to help you build better habits and achieve your goals. Do you ever feel like you have a million thoughts spinning around in your head? Why am I always tired? I really should focus and get my work done. Man, I should eat a little bit healthier. Maybe I should read some books every now and then. We all want to do so much, but sometimes we end up sitting around doing nothing. And that's where Fabulous comes in. Fabulous uses behavioral science to help you build small daily routines, which ultimately will lead to big picture goals. On Fabulous, there are 2 approaches. #1, you can habit track on your own. And #2, you can follow a dedicated program approach called a journey. Journeys can do everything from helping you feel more energized, to sleeping better, to focusing better, and concentrating and getting your work done. Me personally, I started building a little bit of a habit of my own. Every single time I'm sitting around doing nothing and I want to get on my phone and waste some time, I say, you know what? Let's drop down and do some push-ups. And I would say the results are pretty good, huh? And ultimately, the goal is that these little steps that you develop using Fabulous lead you to achieving some of those things that you thought you could never really get around to doing. So, to get started on building your ideal routine today, you should click the link in the description. The first 100 of you to do so will receive 25% off a Fabulous subscription. All right, folks, let's get back to the video. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we will kick things off in our games with the first one being between JKD, Jan Krzysztof Duda, and Jan Nepomniachtchi. It's a matchup of Jans, and Jan Krzysztof begins with e4. And we have a Petrov defense. We know that, actually, what's funny is that both Jans play the Petrov with black. And Jan, this is nowadays his main weapon. He is really, I mean, of course, Jan is more than capable of handling himself in Spanishes, but the Petrov is his main repertoire. Now, knight takes e5, d6, knight f3, knight e4, and this is the line that we have seen in every single Petrov, I think, in this event. I think, no, sorry, there was also c4 in that game that Firouzja lost against Nepo. In this game, we actually see 3d4, which is definitely a move, but it packs more surprise value than anything else. If black is well prepared, and we're going to see if black is well prepared after all. So knight takes e4, and now generally white plays knight takes e5, but there is also the line bishop to d3. I believe this is a line to attack the knight. But Duda takes on e5 with the pawn, so this is already a little bit of a sideline. Now, here there is this move bishop c5, of course, that looks very natural. White plays bishop c4. There's actually a lot of very aggressive stuff here. Knight takes f2, bishop takes f7. You cannot take because there is a check, and then the c5 bishop would be falling, and white gets a huge attack. But none of that happens. Our earliest surprise in this game happens on move 5. When, after all the main line has been played, Nepo plays a move that has been played about 20 times. And yes, that is not a mouse slip. I just dragged the queen up 1 square. The queen d7. Blocking the light squared bishop from moving. In reality, a very interesting move. So the point of the move is to enable the capture in the center. Because what would happen before is you would lose the right to castle. I would play queen d8, king d8, right? But now, if we trade queens, the knight comes and suddenly attacks the pawn on e5, and this knight has to go. So queen d7 is a fascinating move. And it's been played a couple of times by a Russian grandmaster, David Paravyan, which makes you wonder, maybe David Paravyan and Jan Nepomniachtchi work together. I don't know. We don't know who introduced this idea. But now, Jan rotates the knight back to the e6 square. Fascinating idea. You'll notice that Duda moves his bishop out of the way. And he had built up a little bit of a time advantage by around move 10. Both sides have made about 10 moves. Jan needs a little bit more pawn space to develop with the knight, to maybe develop with the bishop out to b7, or to move the queen and enable the movement over here. What white wants to do here is start an attack. And Duda, in terms of coming up with interesting ideas against the Petrov, I mean, like, you literally can't ask for a more interesting idea. Super imbalanced position, has never ever happened before. Of course, you have to give credit to Nepo, who played the move queen d7 and made the game very interesting himself. And we have, you know, rook d8, and here comes the attack by Jan Krzysztof with h4. Very interesting looking position, considering both bishops are laser beaming over here. We have c4, removing the bishop back to c2, and now an idea that is absolutely absurd. So it looks like black should play b5, b4. It looks like black should, of course, you know, find a way to develop here. Jan plays this move a5. a5 is an insane move. It literally looks like it does nothing because white will just go h5, and white's attack is actually hitting into something, right? What is black's attack doing? Well, here is black's idea. Black plays rook to a6. You know, if you play a5, rook a6 in the beginning of the game, you know, that's how beginners play. Have you been a beginner at chess, or were you born your rating, right? We all think we need to move the rooks out from the side of the board. But actually, later in the game, a5, rook a6 proves to be sort of reasonable because when both of these horses move, the rook might get involved after all. Of course, Jan actually mentioned after the game that this might have been an idea that had been in his notes, maybe not specifically in this particular position. But then Jan plays this very interesting idea, d4. That square is covered a lot by the white pieces, but it's also covered a lot by the black pieces. But here's really the point. Takes, takes. And again, if you kind of go down that line of trades, it's going to be a very equal exchange after all. So d4 is a very interesting move to open up that rook transfer. We have knight e4, takes, takes, and now the rook transfer is complete. If you play hg, I mean, of course, taking with the pawn is oh, sorry. You take the knight, queen was hanging, apologies. If you play hg, which it did happen in the game, rook g6 is a little bit too much. Because the bishop is here, but the rook will go to e6, right? The rook could go to c6, and it's just a way to get the rook involved, considering that this bishop has a little bit of difficulty moving. So, fascinating idea. And JKD sacrifices the pawn on b2, allowing the queen to go down there before he launches just a massive attack. He blocks off the rook from communication over here, and then after bishop to e6, just gives away a full bishop. Then plays queen e4, which threatens queen g6 check, which would just win the game if black doesn't defend. Rook b1, rook b7. And he can always take queen b7 when the queen moves out of the way. It's an incredible idea, but unfortunately, black has the amazing response. Bishop d5. Danger levels. And now there's either going to be a trade into an equal endgame, which is what happens in the game, or if you don't take the queen, actually, I guess you have to take the queen. So after bishop d5, there's not many choices. He could have also played bishop f5, queen d5, but in this case, the game unfortunately fizzles out into an endgame. A very, very, very tense fight, but one that ultimately does result in all the pawns flying off the board. And very nice idea here to sack the knight, but win the pawn. And Jan Nepomniachtchi has finished this event with 9.5 points out of 14, and he wins very convincingly. A rough event for Duda, obviously, but he's young. He'll be back. It was his first time, you know, going at it, and we hope to see great things from him in the future. At least I do. I don't think anybody really cheers against Duda. That takes me to now our 3 games of the day, all which were decisive. The first game that I would like to show you is this one between Rapport and Rajabov. They've had very interesting events. Rapport has had his chances, but he's had super crazy games. Like a couple against Ding. He's also had the game that was just a giveaway to Nepo. Rajabov, it really feels like, has taken his chances when his opponents are overly aggressive, right? And with Rapport with white in the last round, Rapport's gonna make this a dogfight. Like, he is going to make this like a fist fight of the highest order. And, you know, of course, Rajabov will play Berlin. Maybe we can have a 10-move Berlin. No, we're continuing the tradition of anti-Berlins in this event. And actually, this approach by Hikaru, bishop d6 and bishop e6. This is actually how Hikaru played against both Fabiano Caruana and Rapport in this event. Do you remember that? No? And knight b3, knight a5 is a similar approach that Fabiano took against Hikaru, round 1. I know it's round 14. Queen c8. There was a move in that game, rook b8. I think the pawn was still on c6 though. We have b3 castles, and these positions are known to be better for white because white's attack that's coming on the king side is very potent, very powerful. Black's bishop pair is almost meaningless. Like, this bishop doesn't scare anybody. And you'd love to play, for example, b6, then kick the knight out, but the knight actually goes to c6, and you just can't guard your pawn on e5. So structurally speaking, you know, when you keep the knight on f6 in anti-Berlins, the e5 pawn is a big liability. You'll see a game a little bit later where this knight goes to d7, black plays f6, and white doesn't get kind of the same typical advantage in the middle game. Now, Report did everything right, okay? So let's just evaluate this position after 15 moves by both players. White is going to move the king out of the way and proceed to go rook g1, g4, f4, and just blow open this diagonal for the bishop, and it's going to be mate. I mean, it's frankly going to be mate. Like, black can't do anything. Really, like, I'm not exaggerating. Okay, king h1, rook g1. I told you this was the idea, right? King h1, rook g1, g4. Now, computer, of course, is not convinced. It thinks that king h1 is, like, slightly incorrect. I mean, it wants to play knight fd2, but computers don't fully understand kind of practicality of attack. And in this position, any normal, you know, human who wants to play the move g5 sees that it's impossible and plays the move h4. And then we'll play g5 on the very next move. Black could play g5 himself. Maybe this is what Report didn't like, and you're not going to lock things up, right? You have to keep the tension. So what did Report do? He's not normal. Plays g5. What? You can't do that. That's just the loss of a pawn. But h4 now is the idea. Surely, because if you take, hello, I go here. It's made in one move. You could defend it, but I even have rook g7, queen g7, and rook g1. I mean, I have backup, okay? So g5, fg5, and Report plays... What? He just sacks a full knight? I do not know what Report did not like about h4. Maybe he didn't like g4, and maybe he didn't like the counterattack that was coming his way. But actually, he's totally all right here with knight back to h2. I mean, it's ridiculous to play like this, but he's fine. Instead, he sacrifices a full piece. I mean, he has to win. What does Rajabov do? Rajabov's like, well, I just got to play defense. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm up a piece. All I got to do is play defense now. And Report brings all the pieces to the party. But at the end of the day, one guy has more material than the other. And that one guy starts trading. And piece by piece that slowly fall off the board will lead to a win for black. He threatens a queen trade. He threatens a trade of bishop for knight. He threatens a trade of rooks. And after 33 moves, Report resigned. And this is, you know, this has been a kind of event for Rajabov. He finishes with 7.5 out of 14. That's a great result. That is a +1 result. He won one more game than he lost. In the first, like, 9 or 10 rounds, he had 2 losses and a bunch of draws. So he now has a win over Hikaru, Dingley Ren, and Report. Very solid event for Rajabov. I mean, absolutely nothing to complain about. He was written off as the pre-tournament, like, 8 of 8, literally on everybody's list. On everybody's list, he was the 8th player to win this entire event. I mean, literally. So, I mean, he didn't win it, but he had a very, very good result. The next game that I have for you is the game between Caruana and Alireza. Obviously a very interesting game. We'll see if Alireza can kind of bounce off of the last place spot. We have a Berlin, an anti-Berlin, and already kind of some differences. You'll notice that, you know, there's no castles, bishop e6, bishop d6 kind of approach with this kind of venturing knight out to a5. You have knight d2, knight d7 straight away. So knight d7 straight away. The idea here by black is to play the pawn to f6, which happens in a move. And now there's a couple of plans by black, but a lot of them involve, for example, a rook on e8, or the knight, you know, going out this way, but let's just say like a4. Rook e8, knight f8, and then, you know, maybe getting the knight like to e6 after developing the light-squared bishop. Something like this. It's very common. Alireza plays an approach. First of all, Fabiano plays king h1, which is like very rare. The idea, of course, of king h1 being similar but different to the last game, you're not going to go rook g1, g4 because there's no bishop. You understand? Like, just because you saw one guy do it doesn't mean that he did it for no reason. He did it because there was a light-squared bishop. The idea will be knight h4 and maybe f4, maybe build an attack. Alireza plays an approach that I've never seen before. It's only ever been played by Jerebuch, Yaroslav Jerebuch, against, at least as far as I saw, against Ray Robson in a Pan American collegiate tournament. It was to play like this. put the rook on f7, and put the bishop back on f8. And then move the knight out to c5. So just a different way of handling the position, right? We see similarities. The similar knight, maybe the bishop will go to b2. It goes to e3, but all right. Knight back to h4. And Alireza offers a draw. King h8, knight h4, king g8. So now we have an opportunity here to repeat moves. Fabi says no. Fabi's like, nope, let's keep playing. I don't want to draw. Position is equal, but there's a lot of possibilities for both sides. Forces will clash quite soon. And now Alireza, you know, he doesn't have to do this, but he plays f5. Computer hates it. Computer here was suggesting black just kind of relaxes, like maneuvers a little bit more, slowly builds up. Alireza's like, no, I've had enough. Fabiano's not going to bully me. This is the last round of candidates. Let me have a good tournament after having a couple of rough games. So we have a big trade. Trade over here, trade over here. The reason why this transformation of the position is bad is because the knight is now the best piece on the board. So black no longer has a d or f pawn, right? That knight stands on a very comfortable outpost. Black can't do a whole lot about it, right? So bishop to b4, rook f1. Now it's about how Fabiano will make forward progress. Alireza here is still unsatisfied and plays h5. This is crazy. I mean, my man is just, he's firing bombs over here. Look at this. g3, rook f8, and finally Fabi's like, all right, I've had enough messing around, d4. I'm removing the outpost. I am cracking open the center. My rook is going to get into the game. So we have a trade, and Alireza sacrifices the pawn completely. Damaging white's structure, opening white's king. Rook f4, check, slide the king out of the way. Knight g5, infiltrating. b5, look at this. Oh my goodness. What is happening? A, B, C, B, you can't take, because the rook would hang, okay? So he chooses not to take right away. Now we have another exchange of queens, but look what happens. Fabi has 5 pawns, and they are all split. None of them work together. Bishop d6. And all of a sudden, when all of this settles, 3 pawns each, it is black who has superior coordination. Not just superior coordination, he has an outside pass pawn. That A pawn could prove to be decisive, because it stays on the board forever. He plays f4, and apparently here it was dead lost. Apparently f4, bishop f4 wins on the spot. And there's ideas like going back to h6, you know, defending and then trying to double up. I don't know, the engine thought f4 was a crazy move. It thought bishop f4 was winning. But Alireza does it this way. We have one trade. I think the computer wanted to keep pairs of rooks on the board. It thought that trading might have been bad. 40 moves have been made. Fabiano has to defend this endgame. From a quick glance, it looks like black just wins. I mean, it looks like just a4, a3, black just wins the game. That's not going to happen because Fabi saw rook a4, and he liked it. He plays rook a4. It now blockades that pawn. This pawn is, you know, they bite into each other, and so do these. So how does black win? Well, you got to bring the king. All right? And then white is just awaiting, you know, ready to bring his own king, right? Kings get a little bit closer each. Notice how nobody's moved a pawn. In endgames, pawn moves are really important. You know, you have the ability to go 2 squares, but you don't need to. If anything, you're killing flexibility in the long term, and you're giving your opponent targets and blocking your own pieces. So you don't want to play moves like that, right? So we see slow crawling moves here, c6. Apparently, right here, Alireza had to go. And he waited too long and gave Fabiano too much activity. Then he went the wrong way with his king. So he needed to go to d5. He didn't see a way forward. He went the wrong way, and then he went back and he found his way. But by the time he had found his way, this pawn controls this pawn, and after c5, rook g4 draws. Apparently, like you just get the rook down here. You escape. Looks like black is kind of running away, but c4 check. And the point is that if the king goes back, you can check it and then win the bishop. If the king tries to stay in the middle, rook g5. King has to go that way, or else the bishop is lost. For example, king f6, rook g6. If king f7, the bishop is hanging. The bishop is just straight up hanging. So Fabi misses an idea here to draw the game, and Firouzja gets the h-pawn, gives away g7, and it's still a draw. It's still a draw, but black has some chances with bishop e5. White has to defend with rook d7. Alireza plays king c6, stopping rook d7. King d3, bishop e5, and now rook f7, a4. Fabiano has to find the right move. It's move 60. It's move 60 for white. He will get his extra time, but he has about 3 minutes to find the right move. He can either come closer with his king, he can move his knight to b1, preventing a3 completely, or he can play knight to f3, which at least targets the bishop. If black plays a3, there's takes, rook a7, the pawn has been stopped. So knight f3 is possible. The other knight move is possible. Back to b1. King c2 is maybe possible. He plays knight e4 and loses the game on the spot. He loses the game because after rook h3 check, the king has to either walk away from the knight and allow rook e3 or rook h4, or go back and stay close to the knight, but king d5. Now the knight is hit with tempo. King c4 is coming. Bishop c3 as well. A pawn is moving. And Fabiano Caruana collapsed on the 60th move. This was a game, and Alireza, of course, wins. As Fabio resigned, I mean, he was just unbelievably dejected. And the craziest thing about this game is that, of course, it feels like a last round game. I mean, there was just unbelievable blunders by both sides. Folks, Fabiano Caruana in the last half of the candidates went 1.5 out of 7. 1.5 out of 7. 3 draws and 4 losses. That is crazy. I mean, that just shows everything you need to know about this event and how stressful it is and how tough it is and the quality of the games potentially when the stakes are so high. He completely collapsed after being unable to beat Nepo. Like, he lost to Hikaru, but then in the next round, he was white against Jan, and he was better. And then after that, it just all collapsed, and you hate to see it, but well, again, I don't know. I hate to see like anybody having like a really rough event, because I know what it feels like. I can't imagine what it feels like at that level and with those stakes. So. He ends with 6.5. Alireza bounces off the floor. All right, he has 6 points out of 14 and a nice win for him with black. And that brings me to my final game of the day. Ding Liren versus Hikaru Nakamura. Epic game. Okay, so the first thing is this was the expected position after 3 moves. I expected d4, knight f6. I did not think that Ding was going to play the English. He played it twice in this event, but Hikaru is relatively predictable with black. And I thought Ding would go for a Catalan, but Ding has avoided the Catalan a lot in this event. He didn't play it against Fabiano. He did not play it against Hikaru. He did not play it against Timur. He played an IMSO. And Hikaru here, in this position, always plays the QGD. I mean, maybe he will go for something else, but in general, Hikaru loves these positions with b6 and the Queen's Gambit declined. Or just the Queen's Gambit declined in general. Hikaru plays a move that I have never seen him play before. This is a very popular move at top level. And again, there is this very long forcing line called the semi-Tarash with bishop b4 and bishop d2 and blah, blah, blah. But there is also the modern treatment, which is to mirror image capture on d4. And I have never seen Hikaru play this with black, and I checked the database. I don't think he has ever played this move. Okay, maybe if he'll say I played it in 2016 in a bar against this 2400, something like one of those things. But if you look at the Masters database, this is not what he plays. Doesn't play this, which means that he learned it specifically either for this game, which would be insane, or probably for this tournament. And Ding knows that it's a very formidable weapon, and he gets a mirror image position. As far as I know, in these positions, the best way to attack black is to take on d5. And then proceed to play like bishop b5. Like try to pin this and play a position, isolated pawn. But black is equal, right? Which is why Ding plays a3. And the point of a3 is like if black continues to copy, you take and then you play b4 and you change they can no longer copy you kind of a thing. Hikaru takes on c4 immediately and plays a6. And generally what happens here is castles b5, bishop a2. This is where the bishop goes. But the bishop can also retreat here and even here. But when the bishop goes back this way, there's these crazy lines. White can blow up the center of the board. It's like super complicated. Or, queen e2 and rook d1 is like possible. Super complex position. But Ding plays this. Ding goes bishop d3 immediately. And then there's b5 and total symmetry. Like, from the first 12 moves, what are we even looking at here? Like, this is a completely symmetrical position. The only imbalance is the positioning of these bishops. What did Ding do? Ding, how are you going to possibly play this for a win? You have to win. This is your only chance. So Ding has to now take unreasonable amounts of risk, right? Or maybe he will just play. First, he plays knight e4. Now, it's not as easy as trade all the pieces. Like, if you're playing with black, you can't just offer exchanges all the time, because white will try to pose problems. Like, white will try to get a better endgame, right? So Hikaru plays f5. So he extends his pawns a little bit forward. Ding plays bishop b1, and by this point was down about 35 minutes on the clock, which is already not a very good sign. Hikaru plays rook d8, defends his pawn on e6, and Ding is like, well, I don't really know what to do. Our pawns on the queen side are frozen. I'm going to play h4. The idea of h4 is that at the end of the day, black can't just sit there and go, the position is equal, I want to go home. Black has to make moves. So Hikaru plays h6. This prevents anything from going to g5, and also potentially prepares g5 on its own in the future. So Ding, after h4, h6, needs to decide what he's going to do against the move g5. For now, he plays rook dc1. He avoids the exchange, keeps pieces on the board, and Hikaru can play bishop f6, for example. Hikaru can play bishop d6, for example, to maybe prepare e5 just in the future. Just can't really play it right now, but also cover knight e5. But he plays bishop d6, and he does play bishop d6 now. Rook c2, knight e7. Bishop is open. All right. Ding plays knight d4. The knight moved, so he immediately takes center stage, hits the pawn, the bishop blocks, and we have a trade. But now there is a square. And in difficult times on a chessboard, all you need is a square. And that square looks really nice, and these squares you begin thinking, how can I get in? How can I pose problems here for black? So let me go knight b3, all right? You go back to e7, h5 to prevent you from moving your g-pawn, although here it's really unclear why Ding did not go g3. I guess he just wanted a degree of imbalance, just trusted that that pawn would not die. Hikaru begins taking a little bit more space in the center here, and really, like, gets to a nice situation. Of course, he also could have moved his rook. It's not really clear why he didn't. He decides to go back to d8 and just meet the knight coming to a5 by potentially capturing it. Rook d2 played. And now Hikaru trades off a pair of rooks, and we have a three-piece endgame. We have a three-piece endgame. I mean, I just don't understand, right? Okay, we go back. Now, here, after rook d1, there is, of course, the opportunity to take on c5, but this endgame kind of sucks. Like, the rook is coming, the knight has pressure. So, knight f6, bishop d6, and Hikaru defends the pawn on e5 with the knight going to g4. I think here f4 might have also been possible, because if you give away the pawn on e5, there is fe3, knight h5. I think it's another possibility to play. But he goes this way. Bishop c5, bishop to h4, attacking the pawn on f2. We have check. If the king goes to e6, then we have check. If the king goes to e8, then we have rook g7, rook g8 is a threat. So king g8. And now the king begins walking. In this position, Hikaru had to find rook d8. I think this was the key idea. The bishop is hanging, but so is the rook. And if you move the rook over here, the rook comes down, and it's actually black who is bullying white. But because Hikaru played a little too passively here, with bishop g5 and then a bishop for a third time going to d8, Ding begins taking over the initiative with rook b7, and he's just going to start harassing the pieces over here. That's just his idea. King e2, f4. Hikaru sacrifices a pawn. Ding doesn't accept the invitation of sacrifice, instead playing the move e4. ef4 was the best move because Hikaru had f3 here, apparently, shutting out the king from coming closer. If you go to win the pawn, I defend it. If you try to attack my knight, rook c8. And you can't take because, mate, the pawn covers the king. Incredible idea. f3, knight e5, rook c8. Instead of that, what ends up happening is white creates a little barrier. You know, white completely shields the pawn from danger. And even though Ding Liren is not up a pawn, it feels like he is, because every pawn in the black position is sitting there waiting to be attacked. And now Ding begins slow improvement. He gets that bishop trade on e7. Hikaru says, no thank you, because I don't want your knight to come in. I take f3, you take a3, but I move out of the way, and your b-pawn is defended by the bishop. And what's going to happen is I'm going to bring my bishop back, then I'm going to slowly defend myself, and now I'm going to go for a6. And it's a slow removal of every one of your weaknesses. You notice, it looks like Hikaru's position has not moved. Bishop back to c3, all right? Knight g5, all right? King moves back, king moves back. Knight e7, king h8, repeated once, but he centralizes the knight, hits the bishop. Rook back to a2, rook c2, bishop e3, and Hikaru resigned. He resigned because a couple of exchanges await, and also this bishop is just trapped on the side of the board. And Ding Liren is a pawn up, but he's much more than that. None of these pieces were able to get coordinated and put up a resistance for black. I think that final moment was when Hikaru retreated out of getting attacked, first to g5 and then to d8. He had to find rook d8, exclamation point. Very nice idea. Of course, the game is still not over, but this was the final moment. And Ding applies pressure in a position that looked against all odds simply unwinnable. Really, truly, simply unwinnable. And he wins it. A stunning final round finish. Ding Liren finishes the candidates with 8 out of 14, second place clear. And should Magnus Carlsen choose not to defend his title, it will be Jan Nepomniachtchi versus Ding Liren for the undisputed title of the world. Mildly disputed, because Magnus is obviously the best player. Third place is a tie between Hikaru and Rajabov with 7.5. Then it's Caruana with 6.5. Sixth place is Firouzja alone with 6. And then 5.5 for both Duda and Report. Folks, what a tournament. I told you at the beginning of the video that I would be sharing my thoughts with you here. And if you clicked on the timestamp just to hear my final thoughts, welcome to the final thoughts. First and foremost, specifically to the chess and the competition that we just saw, it was quite exhilarating. Very exciting stuff. I wish the last 3-4 rounds didn't have such a clear-cut winner in terms of Jan Nepomniachtchi. But he is very clearly the best classical chess player in the world right now, not named Magnus Carlsen. It seems like the preparation that he put in to play against Magnus the first time around really has paid off. And in the interview afterward, he said that the lesson that he learned and what he will apply to this next match will be the fact that he got tired before the match itself. He did so much work because it's a first time climbing of this mountain, right? He did so much work that he probably was exhausted by the time the match hit. And a lot of us forget that Jan's match the first time went downhill after game 6. And that game 6 really, it was the turning point. And will I be excited for Magnus Jan Part 2? Of course. Of course. I'm excited by the unknown. I am excited by the anticipation of potential upset. Potentially the great man who Magnus Carlsen is in the last 12 years being #1 in the world, of him falling potentially to someone like Jan. I hope they get all the sponsors that they deserve. I hope that they figure out the format to the best of their liking. I hope the whole world is buzzing. And before I sign off here on my final recap, I just want to thank all of you for your support. Obviously, chess exploded after the Queen's Gambit and during the pandemic, and we had this massive 2021. But slowly things settled down. Slowly the YouTube algorithm said, you know what, that's enough. Chess, you had a great run. And my videos in particular, I was getting a lot less impressions. You know, just purely recommendations were going down. Chess was not as popular in the algorithm or in the search. People were starting to get interested in some other stuff. And the candidates brought back that buzz in the chess world, that buzz of me not having to search for clickbait titles or me not having to search for flashy thumbnails. I could just say, here's the candidates, round 3, go watch it, enjoy yourselves. And it was just super fun, honestly, making these recaps for all of you, reading all your comments, seeing all the energy on the various social media platforms. And I'm sad it's over. I'm sad it's over. You know that feeling where you have a fun evening with some friends and then the next day you wake up and you're like, wow, I am really sad that it's not, I'm not doing that once again. Or you end the trip or something like that. I'm a kind of person, I have that big drop off of energy. So definitely feeling it. And obviously we have some events coming up. I have a chess tournament in 3 days that I'm playing in. I'm playing in another round robin event. I will be making recaps of those. Then it's the Olympiad, so all the best countries in the world competing over in India. And that's it, folks. That's all I have to say. Thank you all very much for your continued support. I'm not going anywhere. Content will be daily as always. I will go back to streaming more consistently on Twitch. And a couple of big announcements coming soon. Till then, I'll see you in the next video. It will not be a candidates recap, but hopefully it will make you laugh all the same, and you'll enjoy it all the same. Till next time, get out of here.